Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. Montana's Glacier National Park, July 4, 2013. About 5 years before, my brother decided that we should spend the holiday in a small, hidden part of Glacier National Park in Montana. This became a new family tradition. With its beautiful views and general look, the area made it hard not to fall in love with it. So, my family started a new tradition by going back to the wilderness every year. We were all city people at heart, but because of our parents' jobs, we had lived in many different cities across the United States. But now that we were all older, my 2 brothers and 1 sister would bring their partners and children with them to Glacier Park on the weekends. I did, too, and we all had a great time playing PG-friendly day Bakari and eating and drinking over the weekend. This year, my family and I were asked to help plan the event. So it was up to me to tell family members and get to Glacier Park early to find the right spot. That year, we would celebrate the 4th of July. After we all met up in Columbia Falls, a town close to Glacier Park, we went to the park's many glaciers area to set up camp. We got there early on Wednesday, July 3rd, and carried our own firewood with us. In the park, there was also a strict rule about making no changes. So, I told my oldest daughter to make sure that everyone did what they were supposed to. On our first night, we found a beautiful cliff near Poya Lake where we could celebrate. It was a bit of a walk from where we were camping. The next day, around 6 p.m., was when the main events began. After living in the city where life was so strict, by 9 p.m., all the fun had worn me out, and I decided to leave the group for the night. I also went looking for the closest outhouse. I was with my brother's son, who had a bear mace can in one hand and a flashlight in the other. Since bears were often seen in this area, we were scared when we saw a big, male creature standing in our way on the way to the pit toilets. We both thought it was a bear at first because it looked like a bear. However, since we were still far away, my nephew thought it would be safe to shine his flashlight in its direction to get a better look. And that's when we realized this wasn't a bear, even though the creature lit up by the light looked more like a wolf than a bear. What really scared us was how big it was taller than me, and how, even though it had a dog's head, it seemed to walk on only 2 legs instead of 4. We didn't stay around to look at the creature more, and we both ran back to camp quickly and without thinking. The thing behind us let out a loud scream that sounded like a mix of a man's and a wolf's screams, and then it started moving toward us. We could hear it breathing way too close to be comfortable. Now, I was the furthest thing from an athlete you could get, but in that situation, I might as well have been Usain Bolt, and the same goes for my nephew. As we ran toward our camp, the footsteps behind us seemed to get louder and louder with every step. When we got to our family near the lake, the creature turned around and went back the way it came, as if it was scared of all the people or the light, whatever. I don't want to think about how quickly something that big could hurt you. Not surprisingly, our family didn't believe what we told them. They thought that I had been drinking too much and that my nephew was scared because he was young. They thought that was why we saw a bear but thought it was something else. But when they noticed that we were screaming loudly and in a strange way as we approached, I knew that what we saw wasn't a dream. I knew this because the strange screams they said they heard weren't from us, but from the thing. April 12, 2012, St. Louis, Missouri. I have been a farmer for nearly 10 years. My parents left me a small piece of land about an hour and a half away from St. Louis, Missouri. My family was one of the first to move to Missouri, and the land where I chose to live and put down roots has been in our family for many generations. It was a beautiful outcrop of evergreen pastures that went on for miles in all directions. On one side, not too far from the house, there was a large river that gave water to my crops and animals. East of my land was a big, thick forest that later became part of the Mark Twain National Forest. The things that gave me the most trouble on the farm were this forest, the occasional pest infestations, and the drop in the price of livestock. Even though the forest wasn't an official border of my farm because I owned a large part of it, it was still a good way to keep animals out. I soon learned that it was best to think of it as the official boundary for the east end of my property and not go past that boundary. I'll talk about that soon, and then you'll know why my farm is out in the middle of nowhere. That's a long way from where people live or work. I thought that was one of the best things about it. And one of the reasons why no one else in the family wanted it, and I think my parents chose me because they thought I'd enjoy the peace and quiet and being off the grid that it would give me. In the beginning, to get to the nearest road, you had to drive through a maze of dirt roads, which I actually liked. But after I had owned the land for 4 years, I started to lose the odd sheep to animals that would come out of the forest to look for food. Most of the time, this happened at night while I was sleeping. I never saw what killed my sheep in person, but I would find tracks near where they died. That helped me figure out what it was, and since the tracks were always dog-like, I knew there were wolf packs in the nearby woods. We even had a bear show up on the property once. It didn't hurt any of the animals, but it did seem curious about what was going on. I could see it coming from far away, and was safe watching it from my kitchen window. After a few hours, it got bored and left, which was good because one of the main ways I made money was by raising livestock. Because predators came out of the forest and onto my farm, I had to build a fence to keep my sheep safe. After building a proper pen for my sheep and getting a sheep-dog to watch over them, I also got a sheep-dog to keep them safe when they were out grazing. There were almost no more deaths. Not that animals from the forest didn't come in every once in a while. Now, I know I just said there were almost no more deaths, but that was only true up until April 2012. About this time, my sheepdog, Jack, started to get really upset. Every morning when it was light out, I'd bring him inside with me. After we got the sheep back into their enclosure, around 5 o'clock, he'd go crazy at night and bark wildly in the direction of the sheep's enclosure. Before I moved to the farm, I worked with animals, so I knew that my dog's panic was nothing to be taken lightly. On Thursday, he was so scared that he started throwing himself against the door. Also, the bleating sheep was so loud that I could hear them inside the house. All of this made me want to go find out what was going on. Around 10 o'clock at night, I grabbed my shotgun and went to where the sheep were kept. Jack ran ahead of me and seemed to stop far away, getting more and more frantic. I didn't know it yet, but that night would be the scariest night of both of our lives. As I got closer to Jack and caught up to him, I saw a 7-foot silhouette. What I saw was so horrifying and shocking that I stopped in my tracks. Jack wasn't doing any better. He kept a safe distance from the creature and barked at it like I've never heard him bark before. The shape of the creature looked like something out of a Bram Stoker book. If I hadn't been so close, I probably would have just thought it was a big bear. It had the same face as the timber wolves that came into the farm, but that was about the only thing they had in common. Its body, especially its middle, looked like a man's. It looked like a human, and had long arms that almost reached its ankles. Its hands were like those of a hominid and had very long claws. Its face was grimacing at us, and I couldn't tell if it was going to attack us or just making sure we didn't get closer. Just to be clear, I had no plans to get closer. Its lower body was more like a wolf's, but what stood out most was the way it walked and stood on 2 legs. It never changed, not even once, during our encounter, which made me realize that it must always walk and stand on 2 legs, because I couldn't look away as it fought with my dog, who was going completely crazy. The creature answered by making a sound that sounded more like a man moaning, crying, or screaming. It was hard to say which sound was more human than anything a dog could make. It stood there in a territorial standoff with my dog, and neither of them moved an inch until Jack got up the courage to approach it. He called the animal's bluff, which made it run off into the woods. I couldn't believe that was what he did. As soon as the animal ran away, I got my phone and called 911. Jack and I just stood there, unable to move. We didn't even have the strength to get back to the house. I couldn't think of anything. I waited until the police from the next town over got there. After the event, it took them about an hour, so it was about 11 p.m. At this point, they knew for sure that they had seen an animal, but they didn't know what kind it was. They knew for sure because they found a dead animal just outside the enclosure, and strange tracks led up to it. We watched the tracks go into the woods right where we saw them go. I heard an officer whisper to another that the tracks didn't look like wolf tracks because they were too big. I also heard him say that the creature looked like it was walking on 2 legs instead of 4. I didn't sleep that night. Since then, I haven't been able to sleep well because every time my dog barks in the early morning, I think about what happened. It's definitely a thing that makes me think of that day right away. It happens way more often than I'd like, though. I hope that I'll get over it one day. But for now, all I can do is the best I can. Thanks for listening. Over the years, I've heard many stories about the Dogman. The Beast of Bray Road is very interesting, but I've always thought of them as just that. Only tales. So, I've been trying really hard to figure out what the hell was lying in the road the other day, but I couldn't come up with a good reason. It wasn't a dark and stormy night, like in a lot of stories that go on and claim to be true but are just creepypasta garbage. It was getting close to evening, but it was more like dinner time, and I wasn't on a deserted road that nobody dares to drive on or in a scary forest. No, I was on the highway. This particular route wasn't very busy, and I hardly saw any other cars as I drove steadily home from work that day. It was near the end of the day, when the sun wasn't exactly bright, but you didn't need your headlights yet either. And then I saw something in the middle of the road. Now, being a woman shouldn't be an excuse, but I know I have to protect myself because I'm a woman. I'm also not very tall, and I don't carry a gun. But at the time, I didn't think this was a complicated plan to kidnap her. I thought an animal had been hit by a car close to the thing, which seemed to be the case since it was very still and huge. As I got closer, I could see more and more details. In fact, because of the body's size and shape, I had started to doubt that it was an animal, and was worried that it was a body that had been dumped. I wondered if I could get away with calling 911. As I ran away as fast as I could, I was getting closer. So the feet were the first thing I saw, and then I slowly saw what else was there. It was a tall, hairy person with a dog's face. That's the best way I can describe it. Does that make any sense at all? Because it didn't make any sense to me. As I've already said, I love to listen to podcasts and watch shows about animals and weird things. But until now, I thought it was all a bunch of nonsense. You know, just for fun, you know. People can make things up for fun. I remember stepping on the gas and driving as fast as my little car could go. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I could still see the body lying in the road. But something tells me that there was something else there, that this thing wasn't really dead, and that maybe it was just a trap to get me out of my car. Even though I only saw it briefly, it didn't look like there was any blood or obvious damage. It was just lying there without moving, as if it was still alive. When I got home, I was so scared. I was confused about what to do. I know that people often tell you to face your fears, but all I could think to do was go on Google and see if other people in my area of Northern California had had similar experiences. That's when I found out that what I was seeing was a popular story among fans of the X-Files and similar shows. A lot of people have seen the thing I just saw, and they have seen it for real. Over the next few weeks, I kept an eye on the news for any strange stories. I never saw or heard anything about it, though. I can't be the only one who's seen this, can I? I also don't think I was the only one who saw it lying on the road that day. I wonder if this is being hidden or at least hushed up in the news so that it doesn't get out more. Like I said, I just have this strong feeling that I can't quite get rid of, like if I had gotten out of the car. Seeing what I saw again makes me think that maybe, just maybe, it was a trap. The body wasn't bloody and Pierre didn't do anything to it. And I doubt that any car could hit something that big and not crash or get damaged. If a semi-truck had hit that thing, there would have been blood and damage. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Anyway. Thank you for hearing me out.